The man had been sitting on the same hospital bench for over 3 hours. Mud-stained coat, silent eyes, and a worn-out satchel he never let go of. He wasn't bleeding yet. He didn't move. He wasn't crying yet. Something about him seemed irrevocably broken. The evening light flickered through the hospital atrium. Staff walked past, distracted and detached, but Dr. Elise Harper, 27, composed and trained. Never to pause didn't stop because of the satchel or the coat. She stopped because of the way he held his wrist, not in pain, but like someone trying to hold on to something long gone. There was something eerily familiar about him. Welcome to Echoes of Kindness. Come closer. There's a story on this bench that's been waiting to be heard. Let's begin. Some stories begin not with a word, but a look that lingers too long. Elise Harper had always found comfort in silence. It was in the quiet hours of dawn, when the city was still stretching itself awake, that she felt most grounded. Her day began not with an alarm, but the gentle clink of a teaspoon against porcelain, chamomile tea, 2 minutes steeped. No sugar. Always the same. The hospital corridor she walked daily hummed with fluorescent lights and half-finished conversations. She moved through them like breath through glass, visible only if you looked closely. Her shoes barely made a sound. Her voice, even less. Patients trusted her. Colleagues admired her calm. But Elise was not one for personal stories. She had long ago learned the art of folding her past into the precise lines of medical charts and patient summaries. Few knew that she had been adopted. Even fewer knew the circumstances. She was 7 when a truck driver spotted her, wandering alone on the shoulder of a motorway, barefoot and bleeding from the temple. Her coat was 2 sizes too big. Her hands clutched a stuffed rabbit so tightly it tore at the seams. She had no name, no memory, only a faint scar beneath her left eye, like a comma left unfinished. The official reports mentioned a car crash. Severe. No survivors found, just the girl. She became Elise because the nurse on duty liked the name. It sounded like healing, she said, and so healing became her purpose. She didn't dwell on the past, not because she had made peace with it, but because she had no pieces to gather. Her life was a neat stack of now. Until the man on the bench. She noticed him first through the reflection of the sliding doors. He sat perfectly still, as though the bench itself had grown around him. His coat was old, heavy with damp at the hem. His eyes didn't follow movement. They stared into something only he could see. What drew her wasn't his disheveled appearance. In a hospital, you learn not to flinch at suffering. It was how he held his wrist gently, absent-mindedly, like one holds a fragile thing long after it's gone. She approached not as a doctor, but as someone who had once been found in the quiet. "Are you all right, sir?" He didn't answer at first. Then, as if waking from deep water, he turned. His voice was rough, the kind of rough that grows from years of unused words. "I don't need a doctor. Just somewhere quiet." She nodded. She understood quiet. She offered him tea from the staff. Thermos she always carried. He didn't drink it, but he held the cup warm between both hands as if he hadn't touched warmth in days. Before he left, he looked at her again. Not just looked, searched. "You remind me of someone I used to know." She smiled gently, unsure what to say. Familiarity is a strange thing. It doesn't always come from memory. It sometimes comes from ache. Later, she'd learn his name was Thomas. No last name given. No ID. No known address. Just Thomas. A ghost in the waiting room. A presence people passed without seeing. But Elise saw him, and maybe somewhere beneath the quiet they both carried, he saw her too. Sometimes the smallest gesture is the loudest scream from the past. The following week came and went like wet leaves in wind, quiet, fragile, easily forgotten. Thomas returned to his bench every other day, never asking for anything, never staying too long. He didn't speak much. When he did, it was with the kind of slowness that made you wonder if the words hurt coming out. Elise never asked why he came back. She simply brought tea, left it beside him without comment, and sat for a minute or two, not facing him, but facing the window, as if watching the same world from different angles. Something about their silence made sense, not because it was comfortable, but because it was familiar. On Thursdays, Elise had late rounds. It was the one night she didn't expect him. But as she stepped outside the staff entrance, balancing 2 files and the weight of a headache, she found him there, sitting on the ground near the stairs, one hand clutched tightly to his shoulder, his face damp from rain or pain, or both. "Thomas." She knelt beside him. "What happened?" "Slip pavement, slick." "Can you stand?" "I've stood through worse." He tried to get up but winced. Elise sighed gently. There was no fight in her voice, only the weariness of someone who knew how to deal with men who didn't like being helped. And sought under the sterile lights of exam room 2B, she peeled off his soaked coat and examined the bruising on his shoulder. It wasn't serious, but it was deep. As she cleaned the scrape on his arm, her gaze drifted just briefly to his face. That was when it happened. He wasn't looking at the wound. He was staring at her cheek, her scar. The silence, already heavy, grew impossibly thick. She had one just like that, who Elise asked, though she already knew what the answer might be. My daughter, I kissed that scar goodnight every time she cried. She never knew I hated that she had it, hated myself for letting her get hurt. His voice cracked on the last syllable, not in drama, but in something far worse. Memory Elise didn't flinch. She simply lowered the antiseptic pad. Her heart thudded with something primal and echoing, but her hands stayed steady. What happened to her? She asked softly. She was lost, he said. Or maybe I lost her. There's a difference. He didn't say more and she didn't ask. The next day he didn't come, nor the day after. Elise kept the tea warm anyway. On Sunday, a folded napkin appeared on the bench in his usual spot. No sign of Thomas. Just the napkin weighted down with a small pebble. The handwriting was scratchy, uneven. If I hadn't left the window open that night, maybe I'd still have her. Elise's throat tightened. She stared at the words until they blurred into lines. She didn't know what he meant, but she understood guilt. The kind that lives in your spine. She started asking questions discreetly, carefully. The social worker at reception agreed to help. Together they traced the edges of Thomas's life. There were no health records under his name. No birth certificate, no pension trail, but one file, yellowed and dust-buried, surfaced, a missing persons report, dated 20 years ago, a family of 3. Car crash, severe weather conditions, wreckage washed into a ravine. Only one body recovered, a child, female, age estimated 7. No ID, no known relatives. The others presumed drowned. The file had no names, but one personal effect was listed in the evidence log. Pocket watch, silver. Back engraving. To Ellie with all my love. Dad. Elise read the words again. Ellie, the name from her foster care records. The name before Elise. She had no memory of a watch, but she remembered waking up in hospital asking for a man who never came. She had nightmares of open windows, wind screaming through glass, a cold she couldn't shake. She was that child. She knew it in her bones. Thomas had known long before she had. Rain returned with the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. On a Saturday evening, Elise found herself standing in the staff kitchen, staring at a pot of soup she didn't remember making. She wrote a small note, just her initial, and left it in the fridge. On Monday morning, the container was gone. In its place, a napkin. She liked stars, said she could see them better with her eyes closed. Elise smiled. It was the kind of smile that hurt a little. The kind that comes from remembering things you don't remember. By then, the nurses had started calling him Mr. Quiet. Some joked he might be an angel in disguise. Others thought he might be confused, delusional. Elise said nothing. She knew the truth was quieter than either. One evening, while reviewing charts, a volunteer nurse knocked gently. There's someone collapsed near the bins out back. Her feet moved before her. Thoughts caught up. It was him. His lips cracked from dehydration. Face pale, breath shallow. She cradled his head as they lifted him onto the stretcher. For the first time, she felt the weight of him, smaller than she expected, or maybe just more fragile. She stayed by his bedside for hours. No one asked why. She wouldn't have known how to answer. When the nurse handed her his belongings, the satchel was lighter than it looked. Inside, a pen, a photograph torn in half, a pair of wool gloves. And at the bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief, the pocket watch still ticking. She opened it. On the barrel, worn thin by time, the engraving remained. To Ellie with all my love. Dad. Her fingers trembled. Not from the cold. She held it close, pressed it to her chest as if it might echo something long buried. Ellie, Elise. Scar under the eye. Soup in the fridge. It had always been him. He had found her, known her, and said nothing. Not because he didn't want to be known, but because he wanted her to choose. Because sometimes love isn't about the claiming, it's about the waiting. Some memories don't fade, they just change shape, and sometimes they leave notes. The days that followed blurred into one another like smudged ink on hospital forms. Thomas remained in the ward, quiet as ever. He rarely spoke, he ate little. But every morning without fail, he would sit by the window as the sun pushed its way through the clouds, and wait for the world to soften. Elise visited often, not with questions, never that. She brought him tea, sometimes a crossword, sometimes silence. Their conversations, if they could be called it, that were fragmented, not because they didn't know what to say, but because they both understood that words when forced could bruise more than heal. One morning she found a folded napkin tucked beneath her locker door. It read, "She once said if you close your eyes and listen to the wind, it'll sound like waves. I never told her I heard thunder instead." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. That afternoon she left a soft wool scarf beside his bed, red like the one in his notes. He didn't say thank you, but the next day he wore it as weeks passed. Thomas's condition neither worsened nor improved. He was medically stable, but emotionally he remained suspended like a coat on a hook. No one remembered to take down Elise, in turn found herself checking in more than was required. She told herself it was duty that was easier to explain than the truth. The truth was, she had started needing the silence between them. The way he would sometimes look at her, not with hope or expectation, but with a kind of awe, like he was watching something he thought lost come back to life. Then one Thursday, Elise opened the staff fridge and found something new. Not soup, not a napkin, a letter. Written on the back of a discharge form, the handwriting faint and unsteady. "Dear Ellie, if this reaches you, it means the world has forgiven me enough to let me find you. I don't expect you to remember or believe or care, but I remember everything. Your laugh, your fear of the dark, how you called stars sky freckles. I remember that night. I remember the rain and how you cried because I forgot to bring your rabbit. I left the window open. That's the part I'll never forgive myself for. I thought I'd closed it. I thought I had time, but time is cruel when you use it badly. If you're reading this, just know. I never stopped looking, and I never stopped loving. Not even for a day, Dad." Elise stood there for a long time. The hum of the fridge suddenly louder, the world heavier. The letter was unsigned. But it didn't need to be. She folded it gently and placed it in her pocket. That night she couldn't sleep. Her dreams were filled with half-formed images. Windows rattling, headlights in fog, a man running barefoot on wet grass, and always, always the sound of a watch ticking. The next Sunday, she brought a box of old belongings from the foster home, things she had never dared unpack. Among them was a faded Polaroid of a little girl on a swing. On the back, a name, Ellie Spring, '04. She placed it on Thomas's bedside table. Next to the tea, when he saw it, his hand trembled. He didn't speak, just turned the photo over again, as though trying to convince himself it was real. "You kept it," he said, voice brittle. "No," Elise replied softly, "someone else did. I just never threw it away." He nodded, and that was all. But after that, he began to speak more, not about facts, but about feelings. "I thought I died that night," he told her once. "Woke up in a ditch. No car. No sign of you or your mother. Just silence. I ran for hours, screamed until my throat bled. No one heard, or maybe no one wanted to." Elise said nothing. She simply reached across and refilled his tea. Sometimes healing isn't a conversation, it's a presence. One evening, Elise found herself in the staff lounge after hours reading through the hospital's lost property log just in case the nurse on duty asked why. "I'm looking for something that might have belonged to a little girl 2 decades ago. You think it's still here?" "I think kindness leaves traces," Elise replied. "Even when memory doesn't." The nurse didn't understand, but Elise didn't mind. That night, she opened her notebook and began to write. Not charts, not reports, just a line. "He waited for me in the space between strangers, and I walked past him for years. Days passed, seasons shifted. The trees outside the hospital turned to rusted gold. Thomas remained still, a patient, still a ghost of a man, but lighter somehow. Elise began noticing small changes. He asked about her patients, laughed softly, shyly at a joke on the telly. He began eating breakfast, not because he was hungry, but because she had once told him he should. One morning he told her a memory. "You used to fall asleep with your shoes on," said taking them off would wake the monsters under the bed. She smiled. "I still do," and then something shifted again. He looked at her, not with awe, but with recognition. "You were never lost," he whispered, "just misplaced." The hospital administration began asking questions about his status, his future social care. "Housing?" Elise intervened. She didn't explain why. She didn't need to. Instead, she proposed a weekly checkup scheme, volunteer-based. Thomas was the first participant. "It's good for training," she said. "It's good for you," the head nurse replied. Thomas never missed a session, and every week he brought a note, some short, some long, always folded precisely. She never threw any away. One Sunday, just as the sky began to bruise into dusk, he turned to her and asked, "If you could remember one thing about that night, what would it be?" She thought for a moment that I wasn't alone. He nodded as if that was all he needed to hear. When she left that evening, he slipped something into her pocket, a folded paper. "I thought you'd want to finish the letter." She read it in her flat hours later. "Dear Ellie, I didn't lose you. I just wasn't strong enough to find you in time, but you found me, and that's more than I deserve. Thank you for seeing the man I couldn't forgive. Love always, Dad. The truth doesn't always arrive in thunder. Sometimes it ticks." It was a quiet Sunday when the collapse happened. Not dramatic, not loud, just a gentle slump, as if the man had finally grown too tired to hold himself upright. Elise was in the middle of checking a discharge summary when a porter ran into the ward breathless. The man by the east wing. "He's down." Her feet moved before the words fully registered. By the time she reached the entrance, Thomas was already on a stretcher, lips pale skin gray. His scarf, red and worn, lay in a puddle beside him like an afterthought. She pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, the same wrist he always held, as if clutching a ghost. Still warm, still alive, but only just. They admitted him for dehydration, exhaustion, malnutrition, all things they'd warned him about, all things he gently shrugged off the way you might, a dream that's too painful to wake from. Elise sat beside him through the night, not because she had to, but because she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. At some point past midnight, the nurse handed her his satchel. "There's nothing much," she said, "but maybe there's something we missed." The leather was cracked, softened with age, and inside were familiar items, napkins folded and worn, a single glove, the letter Elise had written and left for him weeks ago still untouched, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth almost reverently, a silver pocket watch. Her breath hitched, hands trembling. She opened it. The watch no longer ticked, but the engraving still whispered, "To Ellie with all my love. Dad." The letters were faint, rubbed thin by time and trembling fingers, but they were there. Unmistakable. Ellie, Elise. The world tilted. She stood slowly, heart beating in strange, scattered rhythms. The room blurred, the walls expanded and contracted as if trying to breathe for her. She remembered the scar under her eye, the one no one could explain. She remembered dreams of wind of stars, of someone singing lullabies just out of reach. And suddenly it wasn't just a pocket watch in her hands. It was time itself, time lost, time missed, time. He had spent waiting, not demanding, not forcing, just waiting for her to remember, for her to be ready. She looked at him, then asleep beneath thin hospital sheets, his face a map of grief in silence. And she wept. Not loudly, not desperately. But in that quiet way one weeps when they finally understand the cost of love that asks for nothing. When Thomas woke, it was early. The kind of early when the world feels suspended between yesterday and today. He blinked slowly, turned his head, saw her there sitting in the chair, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't speak. She simply placed a cup of tea beside him. And the watch, he stared at it, then at her. And he knew, not because she said anything, not because he asked, but because sometimes the silence carries more truth than any confession. "I never wanted to take it from you," he said softly, "but I couldn't let it be buried. I thought, maybe one day you'd want to know." She nodded, her throat thick. "I think I knew somewhere in the quiet, somewhere between the tea and the notes and that red scarf." He smiled, tired and full. "You remembered I felt it," she corrected. Before I could name it, there were no tears. Not this time. Only 2 hands on a table, one scarred, one healing, and a cup of tea between them. Later that afternoon, Elise stepped out into the hospital garden. Watch still in her hand, she stared at it for a long time. Imagined the man who had once gifted it, hopeful, proud, unaware of the storms to come. Imagined the version of herself who might have grown up with that man, and then she let it go. Not the watch, but the weight, the ache. She placed it gently in her coat pocket and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." That night she wrote him one more note, not on hospital paper, but on a fresh napkin. I think I remember that red scarf too. The following days unfolded like quiet chapters. Thomas improved slowly. He began eating full meals, talked with the nurses, even helped fold laundry in the volunteer ward, insisting he needed the routine. But mostly he waited. Every Sunday Elise would come, 2 cups of tea, no sugar, a silence filled with sky. They never spoke of the crash or the years between. They didn't need to because something had been returned. Not memories but presence, and that was enough. One Sunday, as the leaves outside turned copper and gold, Elise asked, "Did you ever blame me?" Thomas looked up, surprised, then shook his head. "No, I blamed time and silence, and a younger version of myself who thought love meant always being strong." She nodded, absorbing. "You weren't strong. I was terrified." She smiled, "Me too." And for the first time since the scar beneath her eye stopped being just a mystery, she felt it softening. By winter, the hospital transferred Thomas to assisted housing nearby. He still visited every week, still sat by the window, still wore that red scarf like a badge of quiet rebellion. Elise, now a registrar with more responsibility and less time, always made space for him. 1 hour, just tea, just sky. And if someone walked past them, an intern, a visitor, a curious patient, they'd see nothing special. Just a man and a woman, tea between them, 2 lives. 2 hearts found again, not through drama or declarations, but through the tick of a watch. The memory of a scarf and the sound of silence finally answered. No words, just tea. Healing rarely comes with fanfare. Most of the time it arrives with tea that's still warm. It became their ritual. Every Sunday at 3, without fail, Thomas would take the lift to the hospital's rooftop garden, scarf snug around his neck. Pocket watch nestled inside his coat. Elise would meet him there, 2 cups in hand. They never needed to confirm the time. It was understood, like the way leaves turn gold before they fall, or how grief with enough time grows into something gentler. They spoke sometimes, but more often than not, they didn't. There was no need, because not all relationships are built on shared stories. Some are built on quiet, on presence, on choosing to stay even after the silence gets heavy. One particular Sunday, the sky was a soft wash of lavender and gray. A storm had passed that morning, leaving behind the smell of petrichor and damp earth. Birds chirped cautiously as if unsure whether the peace would last. Elise handed him his tea. No sugar still. Still he smiled, too sweet, and it stops tasting like itself. She nodded. They sat together watching the clouds drift with unspoken grace. After a long while, Thomas spoke, his voice slower but stronger. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if none of it had happened?" Elise considered. "Sometimes," she said, "but then I remember we might never have known each other this way." He looked at her, eyes softening with the weight of decades unlived. "You turned out better than I could have imagined." She looked down, fingers warming against the ceramic cup. "I only got here because someone waited for me." A pause, not heavy, just full. "Thank you," she added. Thomas didn't respond with words. He just reached into his coat and placed the pocket watch gently on the bench between them. "I want you to keep it." She hesitated. "It's always been yours," he said, as if that settled everything. She took it with both hands, carefully, reverently. And for a brief moment, it felt like she was holding the missing piece of a lullaby she didn't know she remembered. Time passed, seasons shifted again. The bench by the rooftop garden aged with the wind. Its wood wore the memory of quiet conversations and shared solitude. Eventually, Thomas stopped coming, not because of illness, not because of goodbye, because healing had finally offered him peace somewhere quieter, somewhere warmer than hospital corridors and waiting rooms. Elise didn't cry. Instead, on the first Sunday without him, she made tea as usual, brought 2 cups to the garden, and sat with the sky next to her. The pocket watch ticked softly. She placed it on the bench, then a note. "Still no sugar? Still you." She continued the ritual. Alone but not lonely. Each Sunday a new cup, a new cloud pattern, a new moment to remember that love doesn't end where the body does. It lingers in warmth, in time, in tea. And so if you ever pass a quiet rooftop garden in a hospital somewhere and see a woman sipping tea beside an empty seat, don't disturb her. She's not alone. She's just with someone who chose kindness over answers and waiting over reunion. Someone who taught her that family isn't made whole by memory, but by presence, and that sometimes the loudest love is the one that never asked to be heard. Sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. If a part of this story whispered something to your heart, comment 1, just so we know we're not alone. And if you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.